Copies of Memduh Sevket Esendal's 1934 book, The Man from Ayash and His Renters, often mention that it was awarded the CHP Novel Prize. Though that claim is misleading, the circumstances around the award illustrate some of the complexities of early Republican Turkey. In 1942, Turkey's ruling Republican People's Party, the CHP, decided to award 2,500 lira to the best novel published since the Republic's official language, Turkish, had been changed from Arabic to Latin script. The contest was one of several events meant to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the party-run People's Houses, which were cultural centers established around the country. Esendal's book came in fifth, far behind the winning author Halide Edip Adıvar's Sinekli Bakal, or Fly-Infested Store. Each of these details deserves some elaboration. Turkish was the state language according to the 1924 Constitution, and going back to the 1876 Ottoman Constitution, speaking it was a requirement for would-be state employees. Yet promoting the language of the civil service as the language of the nation was a different matter, and the CHP's efforts to highlight the best of Turkish literature was part of a larger, ongoing effort to make Turkish the common language of the entire population, even though that population, in fact, spoke a number of mutually unintelligible languages, of which Turkish was merely the most widespread. As for writing Turkish and Latin script, this change had only been adopted 14 years earlier. While newspapers, businesses, and official correspondence were now written in Latin, many of the CHP's own leading figures, to say nothing of the population at large, continued to write notes to themselves and to one another in Arabic script as they had learned in school. As for the People's Houses, these had been established in 1932 as part of a broad effort by the party to connect itself with the population at large. These efforts were a response to the party's realization that it and its policies were unpopular with many citizens. 2 years earlier, in 1930, faced with the unfavorable economic conditions of the Great Depression, Turkey's president, Mustafa Kemal, had experimented with creating a loyal opposition party. When the leaders of this new opposition party began attracting far larger crowds than had been expected, Kemal pressured them to dissolve. With the country once again firmly under the control of Mustafa Kemal's CHP, various factions within the party began vying to define its essence going forward. In the short term, factions in favor of secular nationalism and state-led economic development won out. Factions espousing more economically liberal and culturally traditional views found themselves on the defensive. In 1931, the government seized one of the main organizations associated with this faction, the Turkish Hearths, a network of clubs around the country. These buildings were turned into people's houses and used to inculcate the values of the ruling party and its dominant faction to the masses. In practice, however, the masses steered clear, and the people's houses tend to cater to the sort of middle-class bureaucrats who already supported the CHP and its ideas. Finally, the other nominees for the 1942 award were also notable. In addition to Halide Edip's winning work Sinekli Bakal, the other works ahead of Esendal's included Yakup Kadri Karaosmanoğlu's Yaban, or Wilderness, Abdülhak Şinasi Hisar's Fahim Bey ve Biz, or Fahim Bey and Us, and Sabahattin Ali's Kuyucaklı Yusuf, or Yusuf from Kuyucak. Now, Halide Edip had only returned from exile 3 years before these awards were given out. Before then, she'd been abroad, accused of plotting to overthrow Mustafa Kemal's regime in 1926. While living in England, she had serialized the book in a Turkish newspaper. The English version, which was titled The Clown and His Daughter, had been released in 1935. The Turkish version, for which she was winning the award, had not even been published till the following year. As for Karaosmanoğlu, he remained in quasi-exile at the time of the award. Though he had never been accused of treason like Edip had, he had sided with a losing faction in the economic debates of the 1930s. Rather than suffering for taking the liberal traditionalist line, he had actually sided with the faction that favored even more state intervention than the government was comfortable with. From 1934 onward, he had been given a series of ambassadorial posts in places like Tirana, Prague, and The Hague. As for Sabahattin Ali, he had been prosecuted and jailed on multiple occasions in the 1930s for suspected communist sympathies, and though, currently, in 1942, He was experiencing a peaceful period in his career. That would soon change. In the coming years, he would again be punished for his criticisms of the CHP government. Once again, he would pass in and out of jail, and ultimately, he would be murdered while attempting to flee for safety in Bulgaria. Compared with these peers, Memduh Sevket Esendal was far less controversial figure. Though he had at times been suspected of maintaining links with Mustafa Kemal's opponents, he had never been exiled or imprisoned by the CHP regime. Even so, he had lived a colorful life. He was part of a revolutionary movement in his youth, an important diplomat during the early years of the Republic, and at various times a member of parliament. 3 months after his book was awarded 5th place by the CHP, the party leadership bestowed on him an even greater prize, the position of Party General Secretary. The years during which he served, 1942 to 1945, were contentious ones, and soon after his resignation, the party would split apart, never to fully come together again. Memduh Sevket Esendal rarely brought about dramatic changes, but he contributed to many of them. In that sense, his life touches on a variety of historical narratives that are not often embodied in the life of single historical figures who are best known for one particular accomplishment. Esendal was a well-traveled man, but unlike many of his contemporaries, he was not oriented towards regions west of Turkey. The events of his life played out elsewhere.